Welcome to the Pricing for the Planet podcast, the podcast that explores the intersection of business and sustainability. Today, I'm super excited because I have a good friend of mine, Myrtil, joining the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you, Fabian.
Of course, and Myrtil, we have a tradition in this podcast. We start from the end. So, what would be the one key message you would like the listeners to remember from this podcast?
I would say very often finance gets stereotyped as the bad guys, as greedy people. And I would say that's not the case. I think it's important to look at finance as your partners in driving change. And we look at the numbers. And so that can be a little bit annoying, but at the end of the day, we're all working for the same thing.
Perfect transition to the next question. Because next question, could you introduce yourself to the listeners and explain how you can work in finance while making an impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work at a VC fund. I basically spent a couple of years in consulting, had a great time working with companies, and then realized I really wanted to be a little bit closer, make a little bit more of a lasting impact, and saw finance and specifically investing as a way to do that. So in my current role, I work at a VC fund in venture capital, investing in early stage startups. And we we're looking on the one hand for companies that are driving an impact, but also companies, of course, that are profitable and can perform economically. And for me, that was the sweet spot that I was looking for. It's possible to go even more in the direction of impact by working at an impact-focused VC fund or impact-focused financial organization of a different kind. So there's definitely that option, but I like the balance of impact and also economic performance.
Perfect. And one super important message is actually having an impact could be a great way to be profitable. And I think that's something that a lot of people are not very aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're looking at companies, we look not only at their financial metrics, we also look at how the company is actually performing on the ESG side as well. And that's partly because we believe companies that are mindful of their ESG performance are more likely to be resilient in the face of crises and also are able to grow more sustainably in the long term.
Absolutely. And Myrtil, can you maybe explain how VC can really help sustainable startups grow and prosper?
Yeah, so at the basic level, VCs invest in early stage companies, so companies that are only just getting started, very often that aren't profitable yet. So they're relying on external capital in order to finance their business and in order to keep growing. And that's really where we step in. And obviously, this can apply for any kind of startup, ranging from something that's not at all related to the sustainability space, and of course to startups that are also in the sustainability, in the climate, in the ESG space. And that's really where I would say there's an interesting opportunity, because in enabling these startups to continue operating and to grow and reach a scale where they become mature and profitable, we're able to have an impact and ideally have a little bit of influence as well.
And it's super important because in a world where sustainability is super important, we need to develop new technologies. We need to develop new processes. We need to develop new way of like doing business. And I think those businesses, those new startups, they need this kind of capital because they are starting from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're, I think, very fortunate in the position that we play in VC. So we're investing in we're investing private capital. So we're not tied to a lot of the same restrictions that public markets would be. So if you're buying shares of a publicly traded company and they have to release quarterly earnings, and as soon as they maybe announce an initiative of making a green transition and it hurts their profitability for one quarter, the shares tank, everybody's upset. For us, we're lucky that we are looking at companies that are private, so they have a longer time horizon to reach their objectives, to make changes. And we're really mindful and aware of that when we go into an investment. So we typically invest more on a 5 to 10 year horizon, which gives these companies the opportunity to test out some innovative business models, do something a little bit different, and tweak things along the way to hopefully become successful.
Awesome. And I think one thing to mention, because we keep thinking about purely, a financial impact from VC, but that's not it. I mean, you are adding kind of like, consulting and coaching. It's not just here is a big amount of money and, go figure that out. I think it's way more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely the fund where I'm working, we believe very strongly in a more partnership-based model with the startups that we invest in. So we typically invest in companies that have sort of cracked the product. They have a few clients and now they're really ready to scale. And we want to be accompanying them and supporting them on that journey. And for us, that looks specifically like working with operating partners that can support our portfolio companies, working also with our network of investors, our network of portfolio companies, and facilitating collaboration and growth in that way as well. And of course, the sharing of information to the extent that that's possible and sharing of learning as well is something that we also try to facilitate.
Great. And I'm coming back to something you just mentioned about public company. That's super interesting because from a pure sustainability angle, the model of quarterly earnings and very short-term drive of the company, I'm not sure it will work with a sustainable approach. And I'm glad you mentioned that your approach is way more like mid to long term, because we need to give time to companies to readjust their business model to create new sustainable products.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the big challenges that public companies are facing. And I think it's partly why you also see maybe the ironic situation that some of the most polluting companies, like oil and gas companies, actually have also set aside significant sums for venture investing because they want to be part of that transition. They understand the need to do that, but they're not able to do that as part of their core public facing activities. They have to take that onto the private market because that's really where they have more of a sandbox to do that.
100%. And I think we can do a dedicated episode just on this topic.
There's a lot to say for sure.
Yeah. And so, Myrtil, on this podcast, we like to explore the intersection of business and sustainability. Based on your experience, did you experience startups or did you find startups with very interesting ways of monetizing sustainability?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of interesting things that I've seen. And I would, in maybe true consultant fashion, create a few buckets. So the first is companies that really have a sustainability product. Like it's not just their business model, their product is also centered around sustainability. These can be companies that are basically doing anything from carbon credits to green reporting to carbon capture, really anything that is driving or enabling sustainability in and of itself. I would say the second bucket is companies that are not directly doing something sustainability related, but they're making an effort to be sustainable in their way of doing business. And these can be apparel companies that are B Corps, things like a Patagonia, things that are in a completely different space, maybe more on the B2B side. When we're looking at companies, we try to make sure that they have been responsible in how they've built up their software architecture so that they're not using a lot of energy in their cloud processes and unduly burdening their data center usage, for example. So those are, I think, the two big ways that I would differentiate. And then there's, of course, a lot of companies that are sort of fluidly in the middle between those two that are doing something sustainable, but also sustainable in their way of doing business, ideally, or that are maybe not directly sustainable themselves, but still enabling their clients to become more sustainable. And maybe an example here is companies that are in the logistics and supply chain space, helping their clients do a lot of different things in how they're sourcing materials, for example. And sustainability is just one part of that, but they're also, helping them optimize and save costs in other ways.
Super interesting. I like the buckets approach. And one question, like during your career, did you encounter innovative and pricing models related to sustainability?
Yeah, I think there's two that come to mind for me. One that I have noticed and I'm kind of happy to see is in the air travel industry. And I think a couple of other spaces by now as well, of basically airlines that are giving you the option to offset some of your carbon footprint when you are buying a flight ticket. And I would go maybe even one step further. And this is not directly from the airlines, but actually when you go and Google and you look at the different flight options, and you can compare also what the footprint is of the different travel options that you see before you. So I think that's a really neat way to bring in sustainability and create awareness, and also create an opportunity for additional value that's driven by sustainability. I think another one that's maybe piggybacking off of that a little bit is in the carbon market space. So we've seen a fair bit of deal flow at my fund related to the carbon offsets, carbon trading industry, and different ways that this can be brought to traditional enterprise, traditional non-carbon clients in order to help them make more of a green transition, offset their footprint. I think that's also an innovative approach. And I've seen a lot of different ways that can be approached, from sort of direct selling of these carbon credits to more removed models. But I think it's a very interesting space, and definitely one that's worth keeping a close eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this one is definitely the future. And surprisingly, I didn't see a lot of startups, really going into this space. We see a lot of like sustainability as a core business startups, but we don't see a lot of companies yet positioned on this carbon credit thing. But I think the market is not super mature yet. It's kind of like the Far West right now, but in the next coming years, I think it will be a gold mine for, companies with a good sustainable product or service for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, at Pricing for the Planet, we believe that education will be kind of transformative into this move towards sustainability. Do you have by any chance some recommendation or some, like good courses that you have taken around this topic?
I think that's a bit of a challenging question, because I would say there's not a lot of very structured programs or very comprehensive programs out there. It's really more so based on what you're interested in and sort of specific areas that you want to look into. But I think beyond the pricing for the planet resources, which I think are a great place to start, I would suggest really just trying to read as much as possible. And I think some spaces specifically when it comes to green finance that are important to understand is the sort of whole carbon finance value chain. So understanding carbon credits, but then also understanding why sustainability is driving value for the finance sector and for investors, and really understanding there what the risk drivers are when you're in better control of ESG. And I think for that, there's a lot more that's out there around economics of biodiversity, economics in supply chain, in logistics, transportation, and the impact that climate is having on those spaces.
Super clear. Thanks for sharing. And, I think a lot of students are coming to me and they're asking me, they are interested to join VC fund, they're interested to work in sustainability. Do you have any advice for anyone interested to do a career move towards sustainability?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting space to be in, a space where really there's a lot of need for more bright minds, more people to get involved for sure. And I would say in terms of advice, it's really helpful to understand what area you find interesting and how that translates to adding value. So maybe this is where the finance professional in me is coming out. But I think being able to make that link between sustainability and value, and really any part of sustainability and value creation, is the most important part. And especially from what we've seen over the past year with interest rates rising, and various global crises. There's really a focus on value creation still. And if you're able to make that link, then there's really nothing to stop you.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe one advice for anyone interested to join specifically a VC fund, like do they have to do an MBA? Do they have to, work on consulting first? Like what would be kind of like the golden path to have this career?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. If you had asked me before I started, I would have said, work at a job in finance, work at a startup, work in consulting. Those are kind of the three traditional paths to get there. But now that I've spent a little bit of time in VC, I would say every fund is very different. And even if on paper, they sound similar, very often the teams are small. They're looking for a very specific skill set, a very specific set of experiences. And so if you're able to understand a company, understand what makes it valuable or not, and specifically what makes it valuable for the VC fund that you're interested in joining, that's a great place to start. And the other piece, maybe if you're looking to make a transition, is all around networking. So getting to know founders, getting to know VCs is probably the best way to start understanding what VC is all about and start understanding the world of startups and the world of entrepreneurship.
So network.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. And last question, Myrtil, and I know this one is a tricky one. So what is something many people believe to be true, but your experience suggests otherwise?
I think that's a very tough question.
It's a philosophical question.
Exactly. I think maybe to go back to something we were talking about earlier around the value that's being driven by sustainability. I think the mindset is definitely starting to shift, but it seems to me like even a year or two ago, there was very much this idea of like, oh, either something is sustainability or impactful, or it's economically viable and makes sense financially. And I think increasingly we're seeing that that's not a trade-off that has to be made. And especially when you take into account really the full set of criteria, stakeholders, also outcomes and externalities, that things that maybe are economically the most attractive are really only that way in the short term and at a very high long-term cost. And I think that part is not something that's necessarily new, but I think the flip side of that, which is that, companies that are growing sustainably can also have a lot of economic potential and a lot of economic impact. That's something that's only starting to emerge. And that an ESG friendly, sustainable asset is something that can be inherently more valuable just because it is more ESG friendly, I think is something that's very new.
Super clear. I get that. Very good response. And
Thank you.
Myrtil, we are super excited because you will host one of the key roundtable of the next Pricing for the Planet annual summit in Paris. You will be lucky because we should get the CEO, the French CEO of Schneider Electric, the CEO of Pierre Vacances, and the president of Sita, an IT, a multi-billion-dollar IT company for aerospace. So thanks again. It will be super interesting. If you want to join and be with us for this annual summit, you can go on our website, www.pricingfortheplanet.com. You can also, we have a free newsletter called the Biweekly Digest. You can go on the website as well and join us. Myrtil, where can the listeners find you? How can they interact with you? Should they go on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is the best way and best place to find me.
Perfect. And I will make sure to add the link in the description so you can have the link to Myrtil's LinkedIn. Myrtil, thank you so much for your time and for your very interesting insights and experience.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was great to chat this morning.
And for the listeners, have a great day and thanks for your time and interest.